Live from Westminster, this is BBC News. The Conservatives have lost seats to Labour and the Liberal Democrats as the results have started to come in from yesterday's local elections in England. The Conservatives say they have had a difficult night, but there is still a long way to go.
It's always disappointing to lose hard-working Conservative councillors, their friends, their colleagues, and I'm so grateful to them for everything that they've done. In terms of the results, it's still early. We've just had a quarter of the results in.
Labour have taken control of key councils in Plymouth and Stoke-on-Trent and have taken Medway in Kent from the Tories. The Liberal Democrats make gains and take Windsor from the Conservatives. With over two-thirds of councils yet to declare, there is still a long way to go. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Maryam Moshiri, live in Westminster as results from yesterday's local elections across England come in. Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party have lost over 200 council seats across the country, something he's described as disappointing. Well, Labour have taken control of Plymouth, Stoke-on-Trent and taken Medway in Kent from the Conservatives, among their top target councils. And the Liberal Democrats have also picked up seats and taken control of Windsor, their leader saying the results are groundbreaking. There is still a long way to go, though, as more than two-thirds of councils have yet to declare their results. We'll bring you coverage throughout the morning and analyse what the results so far mean. But let's first get the story of the night from our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Celebrations in Stoke-on-Trent. A key victory for Labour overnight. They took control of the City Council after voters here and across England gave their verdict. Ballots have been counted in some of the 200 or so towns, cities and rural areas holding elections that decide who runs local services, but also giving a sense of the national political picture. The Tories were braced for a bad night and they lost power in several areas. When Labour took Plymouth, the city's Conservative MP accepted his party was being punished.
Look, it's been a really terrible night for us here in Plymouth. I think there's a number of factors at play. I think locally it's been very difficult. The Conservative group here has been through a very difficult time. We've seen that reflected on the doors in the campaign and we've seen that reflected in the results tonight, but you know, we take it on the chin.
Labour have made steady, if not overwhelming, gains, but enough, they claim, to put them on course to win a general election.
Right through this evening, you have seen the two words, the two phrases, bad night for the Tories, a good night for Labour. Whether that's in Stoke, whether that's up in Hartlepool, whether that's in Teesside, right down through to Plymouth. Tomorrow we're going to get through down to Dover and see what's happening in Brighton and Hove and Crawley and the rest of the South East. And the reason is that we have a credible alternative.
Essex in the early hours, and the Liberal Democrats were cheering the loudest. Gains there and further afield were groundbreaking, the party claimed, predicting upsets in traditional Tory territory.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats, we're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
The Green Party has boosted its numbers too in these first elections in England where photo ID was required to vote. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections have been counting votes overnight, so early results don't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local contests will be closely watched as a crucial test for all the parties. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been giving his reaction this morning. Take a listen.
It's always disappointing to lose hard-working Conservative councillors, their friends, their colleagues, and I'm so grateful to them for everything that they've done. In terms of the results, it's still early. We've just had a quarter of the results in. But what I am going to carry on doing is delivering on the people's priorities. Halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people want us to do. That's what I'm going to keep hard at doing.
Now, the ex-Conservative leader of Medway Council blamed the unpopularity of your government, cost of living plans, the planning changes, NHS failings. That's all down to you. A clear message from voters. What's going to change?
Look, as I said, we've only had a quarter of the results in. Actually, we're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell. But the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people care about. That's what they want us to deliver. And that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
One of the big early trends is that working class voters look like they're going back to the Labour Party. Do you take personal responsibility for the overall vote? And did Boris Johnson have something that you don't?
Well, if you look at the results, we've only had a quarter of the results in, so it's hard to draw firm conclusions. We're actually making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, like Sandwell, like Bassetlaw, for example. And you mentioned the Labour Party. Look, I'm not detecting any massive groundswell of movement towards the Labour Party or excitement for their agenda. What people want us to do is focus on their priorities. Halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. Those are the country's priorities. Those are this government's priorities. And that's what we're going to deliver.
Well, let's bring in Ione Wells, our political correspondent. Ione, we heard the Prime Minister there, disappointed, but obviously talking down Labour's results and also saying there's still a way to go in this process.
Yeah, I think that's right. There is still a long way to go. The majority of councils are still to count their results, but we do, I think, have an indicative picture from what we've seen happen overnight. Now, I think the kind of big message really is disappointment, as you say, for the Conservatives. They have lost some key councils like Tamworth, like North West Leicestershire as well. Labour as well, making some gains that they really wanted to gain, places like Medway, but also Stoke and Plymouth, and gaining the mayor in Middlesbrough as well. What Labour are pointing to are that these are the kinds of areas, whether that's Southern Marginals, the Midlands, Teesside, that they would need to win in a general election in parliamentary terms if they were to want to form the next government. Now, I think the party with perhaps the biggest smiles on their face this morning are the Liberal Democrats. They feel that they are exceeding expectations. They have gained from the Conservatives the seat of Windsor and Maidenhead. That is the seat of kind of former Tory Prime Minister Theresa May's territory. I think they are saying that this is indicative that they are on course to potentially gain more in that sort of so-called blue wall area, which are currently held by Conservatives.
I've heard a few Tory MPs and ministers this morning already talking about Labour's results and how Labour's results are disappointing. Is there anything in that, do you think? Will Labour be disappointed right now, or are they on course to get what they expected?
I think we are going to hear a lot of briefing from all parties about what the results show. Certainly, I don't think you'll find much disappointment in Labour this morning. They are happy with the results. As I say, their sort of briefing this morning is that they feel that this kind of puts them on course to do well at a next general election. I think, again, we have to take some of that with a bit of pinch of salt and remember that we haven't got the full picture yet, and that we will expect later in the day to get some more indications from polling experts about how some of these results would map onto a general election kind of picture. I think one thing, though, that is significant is the Conservatives were briefing before these local elections that a sort of bad result for them would be to lose more than 1,000 seats, and that they could lose as many as 1,000 seats. We know, though, that a bit of that was kind of expectation management, the practice of briefing that you'll lose more seats in the hope that if you then lose fewer than that, you could sort of sell that as a good result. Now, some polling experts have been saying through the night that given the picture we have at the moment, with the caveat that there is still much more to come, the Conservatives could well be on course to lose 1,000 seats or more.
Ione, in the last few minutes, we've seen South Gloucestershire, a Conservative loss with no party majority. They've also lost East Hertfordshire, again with no party majority. What's that telling us?
Well, I think it's telling us that some of what were seen as kind of Conservative stronghold seats are being lost now, not necessarily taken over by another party, but I think what some people have described this morning is this kind of pincer motion. They're facing threats from the Liberal Democrats and Labour in different parts of the UK, but I think they won't be particularly happy with some of those losses, as I say, South Gloucestershire, but also some of the ones we've already discussed, Tamworth, North West Leicestershire, Brentwood as well, are Conservative losses that have been lost to no overall control. I think the ones, though, that are particularly concerning for them are the ones that have been lost to Labour. So, as I say, places like Medway in Kent that have been gained by the Labour Party. I think another place that Labour will be having its eyes on as the results develop today will be Swindon. That's a key target for them, and somewhere which the Conservatives will be keen not to let go to Labour.
We've heard from the Electoral Commission today, and they've said that, according to them, there have been lots of examples of people turned away because of the wrong ID. Now, having to have certain types of voter ID have very much been talked about during these local elections. Is there evidence that people have been turned away? And what does that mean for what's happening in the process?
You're right, this is the first election that we've had in England where it has been compulsory to have voter ID, and there were concerns raised beforehand about what that might mean for different sort of demographics of voters, particularly the elderly, but also younger voters were cited as examples of people who may not necessarily have the right forms of photographic ID on them. Now, it is still early days, but certainly, as you say, there have been examples cited, and certainly individuals as well sort of posting on social media saying that they have been turned away, not realising that they needed the right kind of ID. Another concern, I think, has been that people simply forgetting and turning up without ID, getting turned away and potentially not coming back because they had something else to go on to do. So I think it is, as I say, early stages to know just how much these new rules might have affected the turnout or results of the elections. But I think that will be something which the Electoral Commission will be keeping a close eye on, because it may well give us lessons to be learned for the next general election.
I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot about this from all the parties. Ione, thank you very much. Well, that's Ione Wells there. What, though, is the very latest on which key councils have gone where? We can go live to our newsroom now and to our political correspondent, David Wallace-Lockhart. David, what's the latest?
So as we're hearing from Ione there, the picture does seem to be quite a bleak one from the Conservatives so far. These are the councils they have lost. Most have gone to no overall control, meaning no party has a majority. We can see them flashing on that screen over there. But of course, we look at these elections in terms of how many councillors the parties are losing. And that's a picture we can get here. We're comparing, of course, to the 2019 local elections. So Labour up by almost 120 councillors, the Conservatives down by almost 230, and a good night for the Lib Dems, who are up by 61. Now, let's look at a few councils in a bit of detail. We'll go to the Kent coast, first of all, to Medway. Now, the Conservatives have been in power in this council since 2003. Labour haven't held it since 1998. That's all changed overnight. It's gone from Conservative to Labour. And why does this matter? Well, have a look at this EU referendum vote here. 64% leave, a very pro-Brexit area. We know Labour have struggled in areas like this over the past few years, but they've taken Medway Council. And look at the swing here. Conservatives down by 13 seats, Labour up by 11. So Labour will be happy about that. Now, the Conservatives facing other problems, which we can have a look at if we go to Berkshire, we can go to Windsor and Maidenhead. Conservative since 2007. Local MP, former Prime Minister Theresa May. So traditionally a solid Conservative area. That council has gone from Conservatives to the Lib Dems, who got 22 seats, 21 needed for a majority. You look at what's happened there. Conservative councillors down by 16 compared to 2019. The Lib Dems up by 13. So a difficult position for the Conservatives because they're facing challenges from Labour in some areas, Lib Dems in others. What would that mean in the context of a general election? Now, important to go to the so-called Red Wall for some of this analysis. So let's go to Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. The Red Wall, of course, were those traditional Labour areas that at the 2019 general election voted for the Conservatives. So Labour will be glad to see making progress here. They've gained the council back from no overall control. Once again, let's look at the EU referendum. 69% leave in Stoke-on-Trent, yet Labour winning this area back. So I think they'll take that as a positive. There are 3 MPs in Stoke-on-Trent, and of course, with an eye on a general election in the not too distant future, this is exactly the sort of area where Labour will want to see a good performance. Most councils are going to be counting throughout the day today. We can see the change in seats there for Labour, mainly doing well at the expense of the independents. Most councils will be counting throughout the day. The full picture yet to emerge, but if you want to know what's happened in your local area, you can go to the BBC News website, stick in your postcode, and you'll find out if your council has counted yet, and if so, what is the result.
David, thank you very much. David, thank you very much indeed for that. David Wallace-Lockhart, keeping an eye on what is going on across England. Well, joining me now here on College Green is James Murray, Labour MP and Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, and Andrea Leadsom, the Conservative MP. Thank you both of you for joining us. So, James, first of all to you, what's your reaction to what we've heard so far?
Well, look, these are a great set of results for the Labour Party. They show that we are moving in the right direction. They show that we're on course for a majority Labour government. And we've been campaigning across the country on our plan to tackle the cost of living crisis. And we've been making gains right across the country, from Middlesbrough to Plymouth, Stoke-on-Trent and Medway. And what this shows is that we're making progress in the places we need to win the next general election.
Do you agree with that, Andrea? I mean, the Tories haven't done as well as they would have liked. They did kind of downplay it, didn't they, in the weeks running up to today?
I think actually we are obviously disappointed. It's still early days. A lot of counts won't start until about now, so we won't get the results till later on today. But yes, it was a disappointing night, particularly for so many hard-working councillors for the Conservatives who've now lost their seats. But at the same time, I can't agree with James. I don't see that this is in any sense a triumph for Labour. I think
really, you don't see that?
Yeah, no. Looking at the sort of comments from my colleagues overnight, there've been some really good Conservative gains, and the overall picture is a bad night for the Conservatives. But it's certainly not a triumph for Labour. There've been good gains, good seats held, and there's everything to play for. I think since Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister for the last 6 months, I think things are starting to turn around, and we need to just focus on his 5 priorities of halving inflation, cutting debt, growing the economy, stopping the boats and cutting waiting lists. And those are the things that people want to see. And I think these local elections, they're certainly a wake-up call to keep focusing on that.
James?
Well, look, I think, if you look at the results right across the country, we are making gains in all different parts of the country. I mentioned a few of the places where we've won councils or won the mayoralty in Middlesbrough earlier. If you also look at the results and translate them through ward by ward into a general election projection for the Labour Party, what would happen there? We're picking up seats like Hartlepool, Stevenage, Dudley South, Dudley North, Great Grimsby. We've got a real wide range of seats that we would win on the projections based on the votes in the election yesterday. So I think, we're not complacent. We are never complacent. We know there's everything to fight for over the next year or so to the next general election. But this shows we're making the progress, and this shows we're on course for a majority Labour government.
I mean, these are local elections, aren't they, to both of you? And ultimately, local elections, often you don't get the swing voters who will swing a general election coming out to vote. Turnout is often quite low. How much do you think that will change the way that we extrapolate what could happen in a general election from these results? Andrea?
Well, as you rightly say, turnout is quite often fairly low in local elections. And again, colleagues overnight who've already reported their results are suggesting that turnout has been very low this time around. So it will be different to a general election. And as I say, what we've seen over the last 6 months with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister is people starting to regain their belief in the Conservatives. There are things that we clearly need to do to reassure people. But at local election time, it is very much, in some ways a protest. So people saying, well, I'm not happy with the direction of travel over the last year. I can completely understand that. But equally, I think there's everything to play for the actual general election next year. And I certainly don't see that Labour so far has gained enough to make that a reality for them.
Well, I think with them being local elections, you need to compare the local elections now in 2023 with the last time they were run in 2019. And actually, when you do that, it really shows the progress that the Labour Party is making if you compare the results in those 2 elections. So, I think what these elections show is that we're making progress right across the country. We're not complacent. We still have a lot more work to do over the next year or so ahead of the next general election. But it does show the kind of progress that we're making.
Let's talk about voter ID, because obviously we've heard from the Electoral Commission today, Andrea, and they've said that they've had evidence of people being turned away. Does the Conservative Party regret bringing this in now, given that it doesn't feel very democratic to be turned away from the polling station because you don't have the correct ID?
No, I think voter ID is essential, not only because it actually then prevents any sort of voter fraud, but also because it
really
builds
evidence of any
confidence.
Voter fraud.
Well, but it also very importantly builds confidence in our democracy. And actually, that confidence has been reduced in recent years. Also, of course, let's not forget this was a recommendation by the Electoral Commission themselves. It's been introduced by a Labour government in 2003 by Tony Blair in Northern Ireland, and it works very well there. There's no evidence of there being problems for people going out to vote. So I think it is an essential change, and it will build the confidence in our electoral system. And we want people to get out there and vote, to take that opportunity seriously. And so this will help build towards that, I think.
Was Labour worried about voter ID? I mean, the kind of voter that are usually stumped by this, having to bring ID are normally younger ones, normally people who may not have the right kind of ID. And there was a bit of worry, wasn't there, that the Labour would be worsely impacted by this than the Conservatives. Have you seen evidence of that?
Well, let's see how it plays out when we hear actual reports of who didn't turn up with ID and who was refused permission to vote. But, I think the big problem for me is that this is a solution in search of a problem, because the problem doesn't really exist on the scale that Andrea talked about. In 2019, there was one conviction for voter impersonation across the whole country. So it's just not a problem of a scale that you need for this intervention.
Europe uses voter ID, America uses voter ID, Northern Ireland uses voter ID.
But what we should be doing is encouraging people to vote. I mean, I actually agree with Andrea about making sure people vote and making people feel positive about voting and going out and vote. I don't think the way to do that is to put up more barriers to them, particularly when it's a costly barrier. It's been implemented slightly shambolically, and it's trying to fix a problem that doesn't really exist.
I don't agree with that. There is a voter identification system that has been promoted significantly by the government, and of course people can use passports and driver's licences where they have them, but for all those who don't have acceptable ID, they can get that free of charge. It is another thing that needs to be done, but what it will do is really transform the confidence in our system, and as you've rightly said, it is used significantly around the developed world and will build confidence in the system overall.
Okay, Andrea Leadsom and James Murray, it's good to talk to you both. Thank you once again for joining me. Well, let's cross live now to Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, Sir John, who I think is in our results centre. And Sir John, I don't know if you heard any of what we talked about there in terms of IDs. I'll bring that in a moment, but for now, let me ask you, what's your prediction given what we've heard so far?
Well, I'm not sure I have a prediction. I think we certainly have a question that is probably going to be the dominant question of the day, which is whether or not by the time all the votes have been counted, and we should remember that only 1/4 of them have been counted so far, we discover that the Conservatives have indeed lost 1,000 seats. Which of course was what they're saying might happen, but when a party says that's what we think will happen, that what they mean is we're hoping that isn't what's going to happen, and that therefore we can claim we've done better than everybody expected. I mean, certainly at the moment the Conservatives have lost 250 seats with just 1/4 of the seats counted, so it doesn't require complicated arithmetic to realise that we're not a million miles away potentially of that 1,000 figure when the other 3/4 have been counted. So that's the 64,000 question. Whether or not Labour, at the end of the day, we think they're doing well enough to win an overall majority, I think in part it's going to be a matter of judgment. What I would say at the moment is that the 4-point swing to Labour from the Conservatives since 4 years ago is a little bit below what we might expect given the swing in the opinion polls since then. And I think it is also worth pointing out that, yes, Labour have made significant seat gains as compared with what was a poor performance by them in 2019, as well as a poor performance by the Conservatives. But if you actually compare the results with last year, Labour's share of the vote, their own share of the vote, is actually on the sample of results we've got so far, and it is only a sample, is pretty much unchanged. And I think Labour would have liked to have been able to demonstrate that they had actually made progress on their own and that they're not just simply profiting from the difficulties of the Conservatives. But certainly, Labour are well ahead. Whether or not they're well ahead, sufficiently well ahead to win a general election, well, maybe, maybe not. But ultimately, of course, we have to remember that local elections are local elections and general elections are general elections, and
yes,
one is not necessarily predictive of the other.
Yes, exactly. How easy is it to extrapolate national vote shares?
Well,
from looking at local elections?
Look, the honest truth is that lots of people do not vote in local elections in the way they would in a general election. The Liberal Democrats, who made a big gain also this morning in Windsor and Maidenhead, they always do much better in local elections than they do contemporaneously in the opinion polls. The Greens are emerging as a force in English local government, and they've been making gains so far. We still get quite a lot of independent councillors, and they have made gains so far. They made a gain of a council from the Tories in Boston, in Lincolnshire. And now all of this means that actually the share of the vote won by both Conservative and Labour combined in English local government elections is much less than their share of the vote combined in a general election. What we're in a sense doing is saying, well, however, but if we compare local elections with local elections, is the kind of progress that the parties are making sufficient that if it were to be replicated on a general election basis, then maybe they might be doing well enough to win a general election. But inevitably that kind of calculation is a bit of a judgment call.
And the new voter ID requirements, how much have you seen that impacting the way in which this election has proceeded in terms of voter numbers, people being turned away? Has it been as big a problem as some have predicted?
Well, all I can give you are 3 facts that we know on the basis of the sample of the votes we have. And we're not doing the detailed work that the Electoral Commission we know is going to do on this. One, turnout is only slightly down on both 2019 and 2022, which at least is prima facie evidence against the argument that there was a significant loss of turnout as a result of the voter ID requirement. Secondly, we cannot discern any relationship between the fall in turnout, such as it was, and the proportion of people who, according to the 2021 census, don't have a passport in an area, which is one indicator of the availability of the requirement for voter ID. And thirdly, we certainly can't see any link between the extent to which turnout fell and how well or badly Labour did. In fact, if anything, Labour tended to do rather better in wards where turnout fell most, which certainly argues against the Conservative claim that Labour were simply doing better because their voters stayed at home, and equally also argues against the Labour claim that they were going to be disadvantaged by the voter ID pilot. So I just put those 3 facts out there. We shouldn't draw too fast a conclusion, but it's shall we say, not immediately obvious on the kind of evidence we can collect quickly that there is necessarily going to be found to be a significant problem.
The Conservative MP, Andrea Leadsom, said to me that local elections are often a protest vote. Is that the case? Or when people vote local, do they really vote about local issues? Are they worried about their potholes? Are they worried about the rubbish being collected? So John, hold on one second. Let me just take viewers somewhere else briefly. Let's take you live to Chatham in Kent. And the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is there. He's doing a visit right now and greeting Labour supporters.
Friends, it's great to have Keir on the pier. Keir, you've been great to come and visit us twice in Conservative-controlled Medway. I'm pleased to welcome you to Labour-controlled Medway. And last night's historic victory wasn't a victory for the Labour Party, wasn't a victory for us as activists, it's for the people of Medway. They've placed their trust in us and we will not let them down. We know from the conversations we've had over the last few months, the issues of the cost of living crisis, the ability to get a GP's appointment, real genuine issues impacting on their community. They want change. And we know that part of the reason, a strong part of the reason they voted for us yesterday is the chaos of the Tory government. And that's why I'm really proud to welcome you as the next Labour Prime Minister, Keir. Welcome to Labour Medway.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you, all of you. You've done an absolutely stunning job here. You didn't just get it over the line, you blew the doors off. The first victory here since 1998. An amazing, amazing set of results. I didn't doubt it when I saw the energy and the commitment and the case that we were making. But what a fantastic result here in Medway. And we're having fantastic results across the country. Plymouth, what a night they've had in Plymouth. And then Stoke. And up to Middlesbrough, all the places that we need to win, the battlegrounds. And make no mistake, we are on course for a Labour majority at the next general election. And this was all about the cost of living, and we had a positive case to make. We understood what it's like not to be able to make ends meet, and we said what we would do to help people with their everyday bills. and the government, the Prime Minister, said nothing. And that's because they're the problem, not the solution.
That's right.
And what we've shown together is that we can make change. We've changed our party. We've won the trust and confidence of voters. And now we can go on to change our country. So change is possible. A better Britain is possible. Well done to all of you. Fantastic morning. Thank you so much.
That's the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, being introduced there by his local Labour colleague as the future UK Prime Minister. He talked about the key battlegrounds for Labour being one. He talked about Middlesbrough. He talked about Medway, Stoke-on-Trent. Of course, there's a new Labour mayor in Middlesbrough, isn't there? So Keir Starmer has come down here to congratulate his Labour colleagues. Now, just to give you a little bit of insight into Chatham, where he is, it was lost by Labour in 2010, and in the last general election, the constituency was very soundly won by the Conservative Party. So this must feel very much like an important victory for Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party.
Sir Keir, we're currently live on the radio. Can I get
I think he's going over to do
we're live on radio, Ken.
a radio interview. I don't know if we're going to take this or not. No, we're not. Okay. What we will go to, though, is our political correspondent, David Wallace-Lockhart, who has a bit more information about Medway. David, over to you.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer there mentioned 3 councils. Those are the 3 council areas that Labour have won in. Medway in Kent, they've taken that from the Conservatives. Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire, that was a hung council. No one had a majority. It's now a Labour majority. And the same goes for Plymouth in the southwest. That was hung. It's now got a Labour majority. So let's have a look in a bit more detail at each of these seats. Medway in Kent. Now, this had been Conservative since 2003. That's where Sir Keir Starmer has gone now to celebrate. It hasn't been Labour since 1998, but the reason he's so happy is under his leadership, it has gone back to the Labour Party directly from the Conservatives. Labour getting 33 seats, the Conservatives on 22. And you can draw your attention down here. It's a 64% leave vote in Medway at the Brexit referendum in 2016. We know Labour's had a hard time in Brexit areas since that vote, but perhaps an indication here that they're moving in the right direction. And look what happened in change of seats. Conservatives down by 13, Labour up by 11. Now, we can go to Stoke-on-Trent next, the so-called Red Wall seat, those traditional Labour areas that the Conservatives did well in the 2019 general election. Of course, the comparisons we're drawing here are with the 2019 local elections. Once again, Labour doing well, taking the council from an overall control to Labour. Once again, doing well in an area where it had a big Leave vote in 2016, almost 70% Leave. What's happened here is there's been a collapse in the independents, and Labour have benefited from that. In the 2019 local elections, both the Conservatives and the Labour Party were not in a good place, and in many areas it was actually the independents that benefited from that. That's been reversed this time round. Let's go to the southwest of the country. We're really getting across the whole of the map here. Plymouth, where Labour has had another good result. They've taken the council there from no overall control. They now have a Labour majority, 31 seats for Labour. And that was, of course, a council Labour lost in 2021 to no overall control. Once again, bit of a pattern emerging here. A big Leave vote in Plymouth, but Labour managing to make progress here. Conservatives down by 8, Labour up by 5. A few independents doing well in that council area as well. When it comes to share of the vote, Labour on 45%, the Conservatives on 25%. That's Labour's vote going up by 8%, the Conservatives going down by 12%. So 3 areas that in a general election context, remember this is councils, this is local elections, but when you look at sort of the corresponding MPs in the area, areas that if Sir Keir Starmer wants to get into Downing Street, he has to do well in. The numbers do appear to be going in the right direction. The question is, are they going in the right direction enough to make him the next Prime Minister at a general election? If you want to know what's going on in your area, you can go online, type in your postcode. You'll find out the most recent up-to-date information on local elections. But remember, most councils, the vast majority of councils, are going to be counting throughout the day today. So the full picture very far from fully emerged at this point.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Wallace-Lockhart there Well, let's get some more analysis now with Tim Montgomerie, who's from Conservative Home, and Tom Belger, who is from Labour List. Thank you, Tim and Tom, for joining us. So we heard there from David that, well, you know, this is looking like it could be going Labour's way. It's still early days. How are you feeling about what's happened so far? Confident?
I think so. I think a lot of Labour people will certainly be sticking the champagne in the fridge, if not popping it open yet, in terms of the gains they've seen so far, not just in that red wall that the media is focused on, but also across the country. You're seeing gains in Plymouth, South West, Medway and Kent, and real signs that, as Labour said early this morning, they could be on track for that majority. And so, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of real happiness across the base and Westminster, and certainly soothing some of the doubts within Westminster that some MPs have had maybe in recent months about Starmer's leadership, just slight rumblings there. And I think also maybe overcoming some of the slight issues that have happened towards the end of the campaign in terms of the U-turn on tuition fees, those attack ads. I think really we're seeing that hasn't mattered, and there's just a message that people are fed up of this Tory government.
Tim, I asked Sir John Curtis this, but he didn't have time to answer me, and that is, when people are voting in these local elections, are they thinking about Rishi Sunak and his government when they, you know, putting their ballots into the ballot box, or are they thinking about potholes and rubbish collection?
I think they're thinking probably more about the latter. I'm not the greatest fan of Rishi Sunak personally as a Conservative, but I wouldn't blame him for these results. The Tories have been in power a long time now. There's a cumulative set of problems that this country faces, that most of the Western world faces, and those problems are catching up with the Conservatives. But if the Labour Party are having their champagne for these results...
What are you having?
I think we're going to keep our champagne for the coronation. We're certainly not going to be celebrating these results. They are worse than I thought, actually, for the party.
Oh, really? But many Tory MPs are, you know, talking them up and saying, look, you know, we've done this.
Things that the Tory MPs say in front of the camera aren't always exactly the same as they say behind the camera.
Never.
And I think this is a little bit of a dose of cold water for the party. I think there's been some talk recently, which is based on reality, of the opinion polls narrowing a bit, that Labour's lead not being so huge. And that's true. I don't think this is an overwhelming victory for Labour. The challenge for Labour is the fact the vote is quite split amongst a number of parties. But this is a wake-up call, a reminder really to the Conservative Party. They have got a mountain to climb to stay in power. And I think it'll produce a bit of soul-searching inside Tory HQ about the kind of strategic choices they need to make over the next few months.
And that is the point, isn't it, Tom, about Labour, is there is, you know, we talk about a mountain to climb for the Tory party. There is a mountain to climb still for the Labour Party if they want this to be turned into an election victory.
For sure, yeah, it's clear that to get back into government, the scale of the swing you're going to need in Westminster really is remarkable, you know, the biggest thing in decades. So this is clearly a big step towards that, but it's not fully all the way there yet. And there's a lot more work to do, and a long time, not just before these elections, you know, that we get the final results. It's worth saying it is still early days, so it's quite bold of Labour to be coming out now saying we think this is, you know, paving the way for government, but also for the next election. A lot can happen in the next year, 18 months.
I mean, Sir John Curtis said there's no change in vote share compared to 12 months ago. No change in vote share. That's pretty key, isn't it?
Yeah, and that will certainly concern a lot of people within Labour. As you say, that's a really key metric. That's the one a lot of people are going to look at. But equally, Labour people have been saying all along they are actually just as focused about where those gains are. They've been really ruthlessly targeted in where they put their resources during this campaign, but a lot of resource into those key areas that that need to win at the next election. And they'll be a lot more heartened by that, I think, maybe than the vote share. And maybe those gains in those key areas do give you a better picture of where you might see the gains at the election.
What I think is key from the polling, and John Keir hopefully would confirm this, is 60% of the British people want change, at least 60%. Now, normally, of course, the Labour Party, the party of opposition, would look like that they were the natural vehicle for change. I think the Tory opportunity is that sometimes, particularly when you turn the television volume down, you see Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer on the television. Rishi Sunak does look a little bit more like the future to some people.
You're saying it's all about how you look? I mean, that's a bit unfair, isn't it? Surely it's substance over style in politics.
I'm not saying it's all about style, but style's incredibly important. And Keir Starmer hasn't yet embodied, doesn't quite look like the change that I think people want. That's still Rishi Sunak's opportunity. The British people are fair people. They're willing to give new people the benefit of the doubt. If Rishi Sunak can put together a manifesto that really shows that he actually is offering something more radical than Labour, I don't really know what Labour are offering in a radical way still yet. Keir Starmer hasn't set out policies that have really caught the imagination of me or any real voter. That's Rishi Sunak's opportunity, but it's a big task ahead of him.
But how can you bring change if you've been in government for so many years already? Where does that change come from?
And that's the Tory problem, and it's a trick or a ploy, whatever you might like to describe it. The Tories have played a number of times. They've changed the Prime Minister.
Sounds quite Machiavellian, doesn't it? A trick or a ploy?
But Rishi Sunak hasn't been in government that long. He rose to become Chancellor incredibly quickly.
Right.
I think he does still look like the new kid on the block. And Keir Starmer, does he? That's the question Labour need to wrestle with.
Is it a problem with the perception of Sir Keir Starmer, do you think?
I don't know about that. I think that's probably wishful thinking from Tim.
I'm allowed a little bit of wishful thinking on a morning like this.
I think we can forgive you that. No, I think Keir's clearly making more and more headway, starting now to flesh out what his actual vision and policy is. There've been calls for that, but he's been pretty clear from the start. Number one, the aim was to show they were rooting out anti-Semitism and taking the fight to the Tories. Number two, now it's all about, over the next year, fleshing out policies. The danger, if he'd done that sooner, which you've seen already, is that you get some of those policies stolen or half stolen by the Conservatives. So, as I say, we're a long way out from the election. Starmer's got that time. And in terms of, maybe bold, super exciting, innovative, fresh-faced politics, you saw with Joe Biden, you saw with Albanese in Australia, that there is just a desire, I think, for sensible, centre-left, pragmatic politics in countries as a revolt against the kind of leadership we've had over the past 13 years.
I'll let you answer that briefly.
Well, I think Keir Starmer's challenge is a different one. He stood for the Labour leadership on a left-wing manifesto. He basically got the Corbyn vote. Then he completely U-turned. What's heading his way is scrutiny that he hasn't really faced yet. The Tories are going to basically say, you can't trust this man. He doesn't keep his promises. That's much more, I think, the Labour challenge over the next few months.
OK, Tim Montgomerie, Tom Belger, it's so good to have you both on the programme. Thank you very much once again for joining us. Well, you are watching BBC News with our special local election coverage. Now, the first results have been coming in from around England, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats both taking council seats from the Conservatives. More than 8,000 councillors will be chosen in a vote which is seen as the first big test of Rishi Sunak's electoral popularity since becoming Prime Minister. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake has the latest.
Celebrations in Stoke-on-Trent. A key victory for Labour overnight. They took control of the City Council after voters here and across England gave their verdict. Ballots have been counted in some of the 200 or so towns, cities and rural areas holding elections that decide who runs local services, but also giving a sense of the national political picture. The Tories were braced for a bad night and they lost power in several areas. When Labour took Plymouth, the city's Conservative MP accepted his party was being punished.
Look, it's been a really terrible night for us here in Plymouth. I think there's a number of factors at play. I think locally it's been very difficult. The Conservative group here has been through a very difficult time. We've seen that reflected on the doors in the campaign and we've seen that reflected in the results tonight, but we take it on the chin.
Labour have made steady, if not overwhelming, gains, but enough, they claim, to put them on course to win a general election.
Right through this evening, you have seen the two words, the two phrases, bad night for the Tories, a good night for Labour, whether that's in Stoke, whether that's up in Hartlepool, whether that's in Teesside, right down through to Plymouth. Tomorrow we're going to get through down to Dover and see what's happening in Brighton and Hove and Crawley and the rest of the South East. And the reason is that we have a credible alternative.
Essex in the early hours, and the Liberal Democrats were cheering the loudest. Gains there and further afield were groundbreaking, the party claimed, predicting upsets in traditional Tory territory.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats, we're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
The Green Party has boosted its numbers too in these first elections in England where photo ID was required to vote. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections have been counting votes overnight, so early results don't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local contests will be closely watched as a crucial test for all the parties. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, let's bring Ione Wells in, our political correspondent. Ione, you've been watching what's happening, but I guess what people at home are wondering is how long is it going to take before we do get the full picture? We keep saying we haven't got it yet.
That's right. I think there is a bit of a lull now. We had some councils counting overnight into the morning, but the main bulk are coming later this afternoon. I think from about noon today until about 4 p.m, we're going to start seeing many more results start coming in, and that's when we will get a much clearer picture. But having said that, certainly there are early indications of the way that this is going so far. The big headlines being that this is a disappointing night for the Conservatives, that they have lost some key councils that they held, but also lost some to the Liberal Democrats and to Labour, which those parties are taking as heartening gains. I think certainly Liberal Democrats pointing to their gain again in Windsor and Maidenhead as a sign that they're on course to win more seats in the so-called blue wall of Conservative areas in the south of England that they want to win. Labour, I think, pointing to the variety of seats where they're making gains as a positive sign for them. So gaining places like Medway in Kent, where the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has been visiting, but also winning the mayor in Middlesbrough and other seats around the country too, which I think they say points to a kind of range that puts them on a good stead for kind of future elections too.
And you mentioned there Liberal Democrats and other parties, and in a way part of the problem in some areas is that Labour's vote has been diluted. It's been, it's been shared out amongst other parties. What kind of an impact has that had on certain councils?
That's right. I think certainly what's been described this morning is a bit of a sort of pincer motion that the Tories are facing, where they have had a bit of a squeeze from the Liberal Democrats and from Labour as well. So I think, as you say, certainly it's hard to necessarily see how yet these results would project on a national general election basis. That's something which I think the polling experts will be scrutinising later and trying to work out what this might translate as in a national picture. But I think certainly, as I say, what Labour have been pointing to is some of the areas that they've been making gains. So places like Stoke, Plymouth, Medway, which they argue shows that they are on course to make gains not only in sort of southern marginals but also in places like Teesside and the Midlands as well. I think ones to watch out for going forward are going to be places like Swindon. We've seen the Tories lose places like South Gloucestershire already. It'll be interesting to see if Labour are able to gain in councils like that, which have been really key targets for them going forward.
We saw Sir Keir Starmer, didn't we, earlier on in Medway and Chatham in Kent, celebrating there. A lot to celebrate down there, isn't there, for Labour, because that was a pretty key council for them.
That's right. This was one of Labour's major targets, partly because they haven't had kind of power there for decades. So it was seen as a really key seat for them to try and win. Seats like Medway, I think, are seats that were key to the electoral successes of Tony Blair in his landslide 1997 election. So I think that's certainly why seats like that have been a big target. As you say, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has already been visiting the area this morning. He, like Labour campaigners this morning, have been saying that the results show that Labour's on course to win the next general election. As I say, I think it's probably too early really to say that, and we'll need a little bit more of a bigger picture as more results come in later in the day to see just how much or not the national polls are going in favour of Labour and the Liberal Democrats.
We keep talking about how well Labour have done. Is there anything the Conservatives can celebrate so far today?
Well, I think the line which was coming out of kind of key Conservative figures this morning, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, but also the Conservative Party Chairman, Greg Hands, is that they feel like Labour are not yet making the kind of major breakthrough that the Conservatives feel Labour would need in order to win a general election. Now, they are saying that they've made what they've described as progress in some battlegrounds like Bassetlaw and Peterborough. I think Labour, though, not particularly disheartened by that, because they feel like losing kind of a few seats here or there may not necessarily be the kind of big progress which the Conservatives are selling it as.
We talked a lot in the run-up to these local elections about voter ID and the potential impact. I know we've heard from the Electoral Commission and they've talked about evidence of people being turned away, but how big a problem has that been in these local elections?
Well, again, I think we are still waiting for a fuller picture, but as you say, certainly groups like the Electoral Commission, but also some groups that had campaigned against the introduction of voter ID have raised concern that people have been turned away. We've heard examples, for example, of even a sort of NHS worker who brought their NHS photographic work pass, not realising that that wasn't an eligible form of photographic ID. I think the major concern was particularly sort of younger voters and more elderly voters as well, about whether people would know the new rules and have the appropriate kinds of ID. I think certainly one thing that the Electoral Commission will be wanting to take away from today, when they do have a fuller picture, is what lessons can be learned going into the next general election, for example, about how this did impact turnout, because it wasn't just fears, I think, about people not having the right kind of ID. It was also fears beforehand of people simply forgetting to bring ID and then not deciding to come back later in the day. So I think there is still work to be done about awareness of the fact that it is needed now.
OK, Ione, stay right there because I want to come back to you after this. But let's have another listen. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking at an event in Medway in Kent. And of course, as Ione mentioned there, Labour gained control of the council there from the Tories. This is what he had to say.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough. And these are the key battle grounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election. A very, very good set of results for us.
Kent has been a Tory heartland for a while now. Is this a key battleground around the county now for you?
We've changed the Labour Party and we've earned the trust and confidence of voters here in Kent, and we'll do that across the country. We've shown change is possible, a better Britain is possible. A very, very good set of results for us.
Well, you can see we got the umbrellas out here on College Green. It's started to rain. It wasn't the forecast, but let's cross now live to where it's nice and dry, the newsroom, for an update on some seats the Lib Dems will be watching. Here's David Wallace-Lockhart again. David.
No rain in the newsroom here, but what we are getting is results. Still a lot of this electoral map to fill in, some of the latest going onto our screen here, but like we say, the vast majority of council counting happening today, so still to come. We heard from Sir Keir Starmer there celebrating. Another party leader who's been celebrating is Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats. So let's have a look in detail at some of their results, because we are expecting to hear from him celebrating quite shortly. So first of all, to Berkshire, we will go to Windsor and Maidenhead. Now, this council area had been Conservative since 2007. The local MP, Theresa May, former Prime Minister, so quite a strong Conservative area, but with 22 seats on the council and 21 needed for a majority. The Lib Dems have taken it out of Conservative hands. It's now a Lib Dem council. And let's have a look at what happened. The Conservatives lost 16 seats compared to the 2019 local elections. The Lib Dems put on 13, enough to give them control of that council. So very, very good result there for the Lib Dems, which they are very happy about. And we can go to Bath and North East Somerset now as well. Now, this was already a Lib Dem seat. It had been Lib Dem since 2019. The Lib Dems now sitting on 29 seats. But of course, it's important to look in the areas where the Lib Dems already held, how their performance has been going forward. And they've made gains in Bath and North East Somerset. They're up by 4 seats, Labour up by 2, the Conservatives down by 8. And someone who might be paying attention to that drop in the Conservative vote might be Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's one of the MPs for this area when it corresponds to the House of Commons. We can also go to Yorkshire to have a look at what's gone on in Hull. Now, Hull's a bit of a rarer council in terms of the ones that are being contested in this set of elections, because it's Labour and the Lib Dems who were going up against one another. The Lib Dems were going in with a very small majority, a majority of 1 that they got from 2022 when they took control of that council. They have held on to it. They have 32 seats to Labour's 25. 29 seats were needed for a majority. And once again, we see the Lib Dems strengthening their position in a council they already held. They've got put on 2 seats compared to 2019, whereas Labour have gone down by 2 seats. And worth just paying a bit of attention to the fact that Hull, 68% leave in the 2016 EU referendum. The Lib Dems, of course, have spent years painting themselves as the most pro-European party in UK politics. So perhaps there is an element of voters moving on beyond how they used to vote in when it came to Brexit, though maybe not the case in Hull, a bit of an exception because the Lib Dems did take that council back in 2022, but they've strengthened their position. We can have a look at share of the vote as well. They got 49% to Labour's 41%. It really was just these two parties going up against one another. And when we look at the change in share that represents from 2019, Lib Dems up by 6 in the whole council area, Labour just up by 1%. Let's have a look at how things currently stand in terms of councillors. Compared to 2019, Labour have put on almost 120. The Conservatives have lost almost 230. And of course, they had warned they could lose as many as 1,000. So that's sort of the magic number in terms of how bad their loss will prove to be. We'll look out for throughout the day while counting continues today. The Lib Dems adding 61 to their tally compared from 2019. They had a very good election in 2019. So the fact that they're still adding on seats from that looks quite positive for them. What does that mean in terms of councils changing hands? Well, Labour have gained 3, the Conservatives have lost 10, the Lib Dems have gained 1. Quite a few councils as well going hung, meaning no party has a majority. And of course, we talk about what this means in the big electoral picture. What could this all mean for a future general election? Important to note that people living in these council areas changing hands may have differences now in the way their services are provided and how schools work going forward and potholes getting filled in on the roads, because that's fundamentally what this set of elections are about. But we'd be stupid not to think about what it could mean longer term for a general election, and it doesn't look too good for the Conservatives. I think we can safely say that.
David Wallace-Lockhart, thank you very much indeed. Well, just time to just update you on what we have so far. We won't get the full picture until lunchtime, but as David was saying there, we've seen some big losses for the Conservatives in various areas, some gains for Labour in councils that were hugely important for them. A new Labour mayor in Middlesbrough, Medway in Kent, Plymouth and Stoke-on-Trent. There's, as always, more on the BBC's website, but do stay with us here on the BBC. Plenty more to come in just a few minutes on this local election coverage. Live from Westminster, this is BBC News. The Conservatives have lost seats to Labour and the Liberal Democrats as the results have started to come in from yesterday's local elections in England. Well, Labour have taken control of key councils in Plymouth and Stoke-on-Trent and Medway. Keir Starmer described the results as amazing.
All the places that we need to win, the battlegrounds, and make no mistake, we are on course for a Labour majority at the next general election.
The Conservatives say they have had a difficult night, but there is still a long way to go.
If you look at the results, we've only had a quarter of the results in, so it's hard to draw firm conclusions. We're actually making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, like Sandwell, like Bassetlaw, for example.
The Liberal Democrats make gains and take Windsor from the Conservatives. With around 3/4 of councils yet to declare, there's still a long way to go. Hello, I'm Maryam Moshiri, live in Westminster as results from yesterday's local elections across England come in. Well, Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party have lost over 200 council seats so far across the country, something he's described as disappointing. Well, Labour have taken control of Plymouth, Stoke-on-Trent and taken Medway in Kent from the Conservatives, among their top target councils. Sir Keir Starmer this morning said the party was on course to win a majority in the next general election. And the Liberal Democrats have also picked up seats and taken control of Windsor. Their leader says the results are groundbreaking. There still is, though, a very long way to go, as around 3/4 of councils have yet to declare their results. We'll bring you coverage throughout the morning and analyse what the results so far mean. But first, let's get the very latest story of the night from our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Celebrations in Stoke-on-Trent. A key victory for Labour overnight. They took control of the City Council after voters here and across England gave their verdict. Ballots have been counted in some of the 200 or so towns, cities and rural areas holding elections to decide who runs local services, but also giving a sense of the national political picture. The Tories were braced for a bad night and they lost power in several areas. When Labour took Plymouth, the city's Conservative MP accepted his party was being punished.
Look, it's been a really terrible night for us here in Plymouth. I think there's a number of factors at play. I think locally it's been very difficult. The Conservative group here has been through a very difficult time. We've seen that reflected on the doors in the campaign and we've seen that reflected in the results tonight, but you know, we take it on the chin.
Labour have made steady, if not overwhelming, gains, but enough, they claim, to put them on course to win a general election.
Right through this evening, you have seen the two words, the two phrases, bad night for the Tories, a good night for Labour, whether that's in Stoke, whether that's up in Hartlepool, whether that's in Teesside, right down through to Plymouth. Tomorrow we're going to get through down to Dover and see what's happening in Brighton and Hove and Crawley and the rest of the South East. And the reason is that we have a credible alternative.
Essex in the early hours, and the Liberal Democrats were cheering the loudest. Gains there and further afield were groundbreaking, the party claimed, predicting upsets in traditional Tory territory.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats, we're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
The Green Party has boosted its numbers too in these first elections in England where photo ID was required to vote. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections have been counting votes overnight, so early results don't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local contests will be closely watched as a crucial test for all the parties. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, let's take you live now to Windsor, and the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, is due to arrive there, I think, and talk to Liberal Democrat councillors and supporters and those who've worked on these local elections. I think we can go to those pictures now. Okay. It's a pretty wet scene in Windsor right now, and I can tell you that Ed Davey has hailed what he has called groundbreaking results for the Liberal Democrats. The party says it's on track to oust large numbers of Tory MPs in so-called blue wall seats. So that's what's happening in Windsor. What about the Labour leader? Well, the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, had to say this morning in Medway in Kent that he was, quite happy with the results. Have a listen.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough. And these are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election. A very, very good set of results for us.
Kent has been a Tory heartland for a while now. Is this a key battleground around the county now for you?
We've changed the Labour Party and we've earned the trust and confidence of voters here in Kent, and we'll do that across the country. We've shown change is possible, a better Britain is possible. A very, very good set of results for us.
Well, that was the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has been giving his reaction this morning. Take a look.
In terms of the results, it's still early. We've just had a quarter of the results in. But what I am going to carry on doing is delivering on the people's priorities. Halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people want us to do. That's what I'm going to keep hard at doing.
Now, the ex-Conservative leader of Medway Council blamed the unpopularity of your government, cost of living plans, the planning changes, NHS failings. That's all down to you. A clear message from voters. What's going to change?
Look, as I said, we've only had a quarter of the results in. Actually, we're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell. But the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people care about. That's what they want us to deliver. And that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
One of the big early trends is that working class voters look like they're going back to the Labour Party. Do you take personal responsibility for the overall vote? And did Boris Johnson have something that you don't?
Well, if you look at the results, we've only had a quarter of the results in, so it's hard to draw firm conclusions. We're actually making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, like Sandwell, like Bassetlaw, for example. And you mentioned the Labour Party. Look, I'm not detecting any massive groundswell of movement towards the Labour Party or excitement for their agenda. What people want us to do is focus on their priorities: halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. Those are the country's priorities. Those are this government's priorities, and that's what we're going to deliver.
Well, that's the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. You can see on the screen with me is the scene in Windsor, the Liberal Democrat supporters there, with what looks like a giant clock showing 10 to midnight. I don't know what that means. Maybe it has some secret meaning. I'm not sure. But they are awaiting the arrival of the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey. I think the weather in Windsor is probably as changeable as it is here in Westminster, as we've seen rain and now the sun has come out. So without further ado, let me bring in Ione Wells, who can give us a bit of context to what's happening with the Liberal Democrats. We can see their supporters there waiting for Ed Davey. He's described these results as groundbreaking.
That's right. The Liberal Democrats, I think, certainly are seeing the results today as what they've described as exceeding expectations. We're seeing here that they are celebrating the fact that they have gained control of Windsor and Maidenhead, which they are describing as not even one of their major targets. They say this was not even in the top 50 blue wall constituencies. They are targeting lots of seats, as we know, that are held by the Conservatives around London and the south of England. This, as I say, wasn't necessarily one of their key targets, but very significant that they have gained it. This is the sort of area known for being the patch of the former Tory Prime Minister Theresa May. So I think they're pointing to that this morning as an example of just the kinds of seats that the Liberal Democrats are gaining. Now, what's interesting this morning, of course, we still are waiting for loads more results to come in. But we've seen sort of two ones which have actually flipped control. We've seen the Tories lose quite a lot of councils to no overall control, but we have seen two gains which both the Liberal Democrats and Labour are pointing to as significant, with the Liberal Democrats gaining this Windsor and Maidenhead seat, Labour gaining Medway in Kent as well.
And we heard Davey earlier on the Today programme saying we've beaten Conservatives, and I think it's going to get worse. Whether it will or not, we don't know. What's the time frame now on finding out all the other councils that we're supposed to be finding out about today?
Well, some councils weren't counting at all overnight, so we are expecting the majority of results to come in later today. I think from around lunchtime we'll start seeing more counts come in. I think we'll see that sort of trickle turn into a bit of a pouring out of results from about 12 p.m. till about 4 o'clock this afternoon. We'll see many more councils start to declare, and that's when I think we might start to get this much bigger picture of just how bad or not this is looking for the Conservatives. They are already saying that this is a disappointing evening, but what will be key are things like, will the Conservatives end up losing more than 1,000 seats? That is what they had been sort of, a figure they had been citing, I suppose, to manage expectations, saying that they could lose as much as that. So if they lose more than 1,000 seats, that will be looking like a very bad result for the Conservative Party. I think another statistic to watch out for later is, could this be a year when Labour gain more councillors than the Conservatives? That would be an extraordinary result for them. It's not something they've had for a very long time, so I think that will be something Labour will be watching out for later this afternoon as well.
We're still watching that scene, Ione, in Windsor, waiting for Ed Davey to arrive. How big a problem is the fact that a lot of these blue wall councils potentially could turn for the Lib Dems? How big a problem is that for Labour in terms of diluting those who don't vote for Conservatives, and not to vote just for Labour, but to vote for other parties too?
I think you're right. There is, obviously, we are seeing some councils which are going to no overall control, where no one sort of opposition party has managed to take it from the Conservatives, although the Conservatives have lost overall control of the council. I think, though, I would say that Labour and the Liberal Democrats have sort of focused their main efforts to different places. Certainly the Liberal Democrats for quite some time, both at a council level but also a parliamentary level, have been particularly targeting what are seen as some of those kind of potentially marginal Conservative seats in the south of England and the southwest of England. One of the sort of main factors as well that they have been campaigning on has often been things like sort of opposing new housing developments, which is something which has been, I suppose, a point of controversy for those who oppose the Liberal Democrats' policies, but also something Liberal Democrats have used locally to campaign. I think one thing as well that we do, of course, need to remember with these results and why it can sometimes be difficult to draw broader conclusions about what might happen in a general election is we need to remember that as well as those big picture factors in this election, like kind of conservative crises over the last year or two that have certainly played a role, the economic picture as well and the cost of living crisis that has certainly played a role, there are also local factors at play, and I think that's something which will be interesting to see.
Isn't it? It's not just an election, it's about things like, worries about trees being cut in the middle of my town, or potholes not being filled, or rubbish not being collected. There's a lot of that as well, isn't there? It's important to point out.
That's right. I mean, certainly places like Plymouth, for example, some commentators have been mentioning today an issue of trees being cut down in Plymouth is one example. That may not be, of course, the only factor, but I think we do have to remember some of these local issues that we'll see play out on the doorstep. And that's something which actually parties like the Greens, I think, have been taking comfort from as well today. They've made some gains in places like South Tyneside and Southend-on-Sea, but certainly pointing, I think, to where they've been able to make certain differences locally as reasons why they're hoping to make some gains this afternoon.
I only have a look at this clock. I don't know if you can see it, but on the top of the clock it says time's up for Rishi Sunak. Lib Dems obviously believe that these local elections are a fair reflection of what's happening or what could potentially happen in a general election, but it's not as simple as that, is it?
That's right. I think a lot of Conservatives, and some of whom I've spoken to this morning, but also some who we've been hearing on our airwaves as well across the morning, are hoping that this isn't an indication of necessarily Rishi Sunak's leadership. I think we can, though, go to Ed Davey now, who's going to speak.
Yes, Ed Davey is there, Ione, and understandably, Ione, he is being greeted, welcomed by an ecstatic crowd of Lib Dem supporters.
That's right, the Liberal Democrats are certainly known for their electoral victory parades and props.
What's he saying?
But I think it's time we started the countdown to the next general election. Yes! Are you ready?
Yes!
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Golden ticket on Britain's Got Talent.
That's right. Well, this is sort of textbook Liberal Democrat victory parade, I think. We've seen before them use bulldozers to knock down blue walls. We've seen hammers and now a clock being used.
Liberal Democrats making big gains across the country. We've beaten the Conservatives in Bath and in Brentwood, in Hertfordshire and in Hinckley. We're making gains off Labour. We've increased our majority in Hull. And we're making huge gains across the country against the Conservatives. We're continuing to make sure the blue wall tumbles down. Yay! And I'm so proud of the result here in Windsor. And I'm so proud that when Katy Perry and Lionel Richie enter Windsor Castle for the coronation concert on Sunday, they'll be going into a ward that's represented by 3 brand new Liberal Democrat councillors. Really proud of Liberal Democrats here in Windsor and Maidenhead. So many people I could mention. I do want to single out one of our new councillors, George Blundell. Age 22, what an amazing result. Thank you. But there's more to come as they continue to count the votes across the country. More gains, I think, for the Liberal Democrats to come. And that's thanks to the hard work of so many Liberal Democrat campaigners across the country. They've sent a message. The Liberal Democrats are the big winners in this year's local elections. Just like we were last year. And just like we were in 2019 when these seats were last fought. And when people have a chance to vote, when they can go into those polling stations, they're choosing to vote for a Liberal Democrat candidate, a Liberal Democrat campaigner. They know that we work hard for them, that we listen to their concerns, and they will never take them for granted. The people have sent a huge message A message so loud that even someone as out of touch as Rishi Sunak can't ignore. We're fed up of waiting so long for the basics. Waiting for hours for an ambulance, days for a GP appointment, months and even years for a hospital appointment. Waiting in vain for the police to turn up when there's been a break-in. Waiting for months for a pothole to be mended and repaired. Waiting for real action to help people who are struggling with their soaring energy bills and food prices. And waiting, still waiting, for those hospitals that have been promised for years now. Waiting for an end to the sewage that these companies keep pouring into our rivers and onto our beaches. And we're waiting for the government to listen to people and stop taking them for granted. People are waiting for a fair deal. These Conservative MPs are out of touch, out of ideas, and out of excuses. People are fed up of waiting for a chance to kick them out. We're all fed up of waiting for a general election. And you know, I think there's a chance now that we can have that general election within the next year. And I think the message is clear. The time's up for Rishi Sunak and his appalling Conservative government. The Liberal Democrats have shown that we are the ones working hard in communities across our country. We're the ones to beat so many Conservatives across the blue wall and beyond. And I'm determined that the Liberal Democrats keep working, don't take people for granted, show our amazing policies. And so my message to my party is a great night for us, but let's go back and work even harder so we can beat the Conservatives at the next general election. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that's Ed Davey. Quite excited looking Ed Davey and sounding as well. Moving that, the big hand of the clock, or was it little hand? I can't remember. Very slowly towards midnight. Big cries at the end. It was the big hand, I'm being told by Rob in my ear. Let me ask you this, Iona. You talked about the Lib Dems being quite gimmicky. Clearly they are. There's also reference to Lionel Richie and Katy Perry. They're going to be relieved, apparently, to be walking into Windsor under a Lib Dem council. But jokes aside, there was a serious message there, wasn't there, from Ed Davey? He's very keen on a general election. Is he right to be?
I think certainly he feels heartened by the results that they've seen in Windsor and Maidenhead today. He feels like, given that this wasn't even one of their prime targets in the south of England, that this could mean that the Liberal Democrats are on course to take more seats from the Conservatives in some of those key general election targets of theirs. I think one thing that was interesting there from his speech, he talked a lot about things that people are tired of, whether it's NHS waiting lists or sewage. I think a challenge for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives lately has been that Rishi Sunak's really sold himself as a leader of delivery, but something which Labour and the Liberal Democrats have really made kind of virtue of as part of their campaigns is, okay, it's all very well talking about delivery, but you've been in power for 13 years. And it's that length and duration of one party being in power now, which I think is difficult for the Conservatives, trying to claim that they are changing things, that they want to improve things. We've seen this happen in the last couple of weeks, particularly when you've heard Conservative ministers talk about, whether it's the NHS, whether it's immigration system, talking about things being broken and the needs to fix it. The big, I think, message really from Labour and the Liberal Democrats throughout this campaign is, well, if it's broken, that's your fault, and we're now the ones to fix it. So I think one thing I think which the Conservatives have taken some sort of hope from, I suppose, in this campaign, they feel like they've kind of been owed a bit of a kicking. Perhaps they feel like maybe the numbers that they did have were slightly inflated by, for example, the Jeremy Corbyn years under Labour. So I think certainly the Conservatives weren't necessarily expecting to do particularly well in this set of elections, though. But one thing that will be key to watch is how much or not their sort of expectation management figures are exceeded later today.
OK, Ione, thank you very much for that analysis. Well, let's cross back to our newsroom and our political correspondent, David Wallace-Lockhart. David, how's the picture looking right now?
Well, we heard Sir Davey there say that time's up for Rishi Sunak, but Rishi Sunak's trying to do what any leader in a difficult position has to do, which is find a few examples where the picture perhaps look a bit better for the Conservatives and try and paint a rosier picture. It's not easy for him, though, with this set of results. Let's go to Sandwell. We're zoomed in the West Midlands here. Now, looking at this, you can see how dominant Labour are. It's been a Labour council since the 1970s. They have 60 seats compared to the Conservative 12. Why is Rishi Sunak bringing that up? Well, it's slightly bucking the national trend in that Labour went down by 2 seats, the Conservatives up by 2 seats compared to 2019. Now, there are government-appointed commissioners who've been brought into this council recently because of issues around governance and leadership, so perhaps that playing in here. If we go to Cambridgeshire, we can go to Peterborough, another example Rishi Sunak brought up there. The Conservatives with 30 seats, Labour with 14. And in terms of changes, the Conservatives went up by 1, Labour went down by 2. 35% the vote for the Conservatives, 32% for Labour. Comparing that to 2019, the Conservatives up by 3%, Labour up by 4%. So the Conservatives are taking this as an example of somewhere they've done better, but actually Labour actually taking a bigger share of the vote in terms of changes since the 2019 local elections. Big picture, let's have a look at where we are on councillors compared to the 2019 local elections. Labour up by 119, Conservatives down by almost 230, the Lib Dems up by 62. In terms of councils changing hands, Labour have gained 3, Conservatives lost 10, the Lib Dems gaining 1. And just quickly, in Maidstone in Kent, we have the figures for people being turned away without having ID. That's the first council to give us those figures. Of course, this was the first set of local elections in England where photo ID was needed. In Maidstone in Kent, 137 people came without photo ID and were turned away. 115 came back after getting photo ID, but of course that means 22 people came to vote, were turned away and never came back with photo ID. Now, in terms of the overall percentage of people voting, this might not be huge numbers, but it's more than a handful. 137 people didn't bring ID to vote and were turned away. And those are actually only people who made it as far as going into the building, into the polling station and trying to get their ballot paper.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Wallace-Lockhart there. Across what is happening across England, and as are we here on BBC News with this special programme covering the results from those local elections. Let's talk now to a couple of more guests. Rosa Prince is the editor of Politico London Playbook, and Katy is the political editor of The Spectator, and they both join me now. Thank you, both of you, for joining me. Rosa, first of all to you, what's your reaction to what you've seen so far today? Obviously, the full picture is not quite here yet, but what do we glean from what we've seen so far?
Well, I think the top story is that it's looking like a really bad night for the Conservatives. Labour, conversely, having a pretty good night. Maybe not the absolute stratospheric breakthrough of the kind of pre-Blair years, but I think they'll be happy. And the Lib Dems doing well, much better than I think they thought. So the idea that Rishi Sunak was somehow going to steady the ship, that he was going to have a change of direction, that people were going to think again about whether the Tories' time is up, I think that narrative has now been challenged.
But Katy, how much has this got to do with Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party? How much does it have to do with local issues? Because, of course, these are, after all, local elections.
Yes, and for example, if you look at Plymouth, where there's obviously lots of local issues regarding trees, for example. So I think extracting from local elections a clear picture of what would happen in a general election is always quite tricky to do. But you do get a sense of the mood. And I think, therefore, it was pretty priced in the Tories would have a bad night. I think that looking at the results so far, and there is some way to go, they're having a bit of a worse night than they themselves were expecting. Is it going to change the setup for Rishi Sunak? We're not, I think, at the point where, if you think back to 6 months ago, when the Tories constantly seemed in consistent psychodrama and people talk about letters. It's not like that, but it does make that whole recovery narrative, the sense that he is closing the gap, it makes it harder, and I think it disrupts that. And I think for Labour, there's plenty to point to, but it seems as though, speaking to figures this morning, perhaps it's the Liberal Democrats who had the most to smile about.
Well, Ed Davey was literally, smiling his head off, wasn't he? And getting overexcited, talking about Lionel Richie, Katy Perry coming in and being proud of coming into Windsor as a Lib Dem council. That excitement aside, it has been a good day for the Lib Dems, hasn't it? I mean, what can they take away from this?
Yeah, I think they do have to be cautious because traditionally the Liberal Democrats do quite well at local level. That said, we don't want to take away from Ed Davey's party with Lionel Richie, but it very much so is those local issues. I guess they'll be wondering, can this be a kind of gateway drug to voting for them at the general election? The Liberal Democrats have had a terrible time since the coalition years. I think the fact that Keir Starmer now appears to be U-turning on tuition fees, which is one of the big issues that led to people being quite dissatisfied them when they were in the coalition, may help them going into the general election. So yeah, they're definitely going to be hopeful. And I think for all the parties, it's about a kind of a sense of momentum. You need to energise your councillors and the people who bang on doors, because they're going to be the people you want to bang on doors for you at the general election. And I think there'll be some quite unhappy Conservatives out there who feel that they've been let down by the National Party.
And the vibe we're getting from Conservative MPs behind the cameras, behind closed doors, is that they aren't happy, they're worried. Where is the way out for Rishi Sunak now, do you think? What does the path towards the next general election look like?
I think Tory MPs have been worried for some time. I mean, if we think back to over the summer, autumn, there was a 30-something point lead. It's looking slightly less apocalyptic for the Tories, but it's clearly not looking good. And I think today will just crystallise that fear because you're seeing the polls in action. So that will be a concern for Tory MPs. And in terms of where Rishi Sunak goes, I mean, I think he is someone who's going to try and tell people, as we've seen, Keir Starmer doesn't have mass love, etc., stick with our plan. I think the problem is if you start to have MPs being a bit more factional and panicking on things like housing, for example. Keir Starmer trying to make that a dividing line, but if you look at the Lib Dem gains, I think that's going to increase concerns actually against house building amongst some Tory MPs who think planning reform is something that's hurt them. So you can see some of the internal debates, I think, within the Tory party probably bubbling to the surface again.
I see you're nodding there, Rosa.
Yeah, I mean, 6 months ago there was even talk that Rishi Sunak could be challenged if he had a poor set of local elections. That's just not going to happen now. I think he's established himself at the top of the party and MPs are kind of going to die or live with him. That said, I think probably what they're going to do is very much hope that we all turn our attention to the coronation and forget about these local elections and that the economy begins to come round, because once you get into a general election, it's not those local issues as much. It's not the trees and the potholes. It is how you feel about your pay packet, how you feel about whether you can afford to go to the shops anymore, and so I think it's all crossing fingers that.
Having said that, inflation is still high. It's not predicted to go down much in the near future. Of course, interest rates are high as well. In 10 seconds, Katy, if you can tell me, is the economy the key?
I think the economy is always key in an election, but after that is obviously a leader, and where they seem like a prime minister is where Rishi Sunak thinks he might have something over Keir Starmer.
Okay, fantastic. Well done. Katy, Rosa, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on College Green. You're watching BBC News. Stay with us wherever you are. Live from Westminster, this is BBC News. The Conservatives have lost over 200 seats to Labour and the Liberal Democrats as the results have started to come in from yesterday's local elections in England. Well, Labour have taken control of key councils in Plymouth and Stoke-on-Trent and Medway. Keir Starmer described the results as amazing.
All the places that we need to win, the battlegrounds, and make no mistake, we are on course for a Labour majority at the next general election.
The Conservatives say they have had a difficult night, but there is still a long way to go.
If you look at the results, we've only had a quarter of the results in, so it's hard to draw firm conclusions. We're actually making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, like Sandwell, like Bassetlaw, for example.
The Liberal Democrats make gains and take Windsor from the Conservatives. Sir Ed Davey says there are more gains to come for his party.
And that's thanks to the hard work of so many Liberal Democrat campaigners across the country. They've sent a message. The Liberal Democrats are the big winners in this year's local elections.
Yeah! With around 3/4 of councils yet to declare, there is still a way to go. Hello and welcome. I'm Maryam Moshiri, live in Westminster as results from yesterday's local elections across England come in. Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party have lost over 200 council seats across the country, something he's described as disappointing. Labour have taken control of Plymouth, Stoke-on-Trent and taken Medway in Kent from the Conservatives, among their top target councils. So Keir Starmer this morning said the party was on course to win a majority in the next general election. And the Liberal Democrats have also picked up seats and taken control of Windsor. Their leader Davey celebrating what he called groundbreaking results and saying time's up for Rishi Sunak. Well, there is still a pretty long way to go, as around 3/4 of councils have yet to declare their results. We'll bring you coverage throughout the morning and analysis of what this means so far. But first, let's get the story of the night from our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Celebrations in Stoke-on-Trent. A key victory for Labour overnight. They took control of the City Council after voters here and across England gave their verdict. Ballots have been counted in some of the 200 or so towns, cities and rural areas holding elections to decide who runs local services, but also giving a sense of the national political picture. The Tories were braced for a bad night and they lost power in several areas. When Labour took Plymouth, the city's Conservative MP accepted his party was being punished.
Look, it's been a really terrible night for us here in Plymouth. I think there's a number of factors at play. I think locally it's been very difficult. The Conservative group here has been through a very difficult time. We've seen that reflected on the doors in the campaign and we've seen that reflected in the results tonight. But, you know, we take it on the chin.
Labour have made steady, if not overwhelming, gains, but enough, they claim, to put them on course to win a general election.
Right through this evening, you have seen the two words, the two phrases, bad night for the Tories, a good night for Labour. Whether that's in Stoke, whether that's up in Hartlepool, whether that's in Teesside, right down through to Plymouth. Tomorrow we're going to get through down to Dover and see what's happening in Brighton and Hove and Crawley and the rest of the South East. And the reason is that we have a credible alternative.
Essex in the early hours, and the Liberal Democrats were cheering the loudest. Gains there and further afield were groundbreaking, the party claimed, predicting upsets in traditional Tory territory.
Fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats in one of the safest Tory seats in the country. We've gained 3 seats, we're now up to 17 seats, and the council moves into an overall control. And it's a time of change in Brentwood, and we're really delighted. It's fantastic news.
The Green Party has boosted its numbers too in these first elections in England where photo ID was required to vote. Only around a quarter of the councils holding elections have been counting votes overnight, so early results don't give anything like the full picture. But in the hours ahead, these local contests will be closely watched as a crucial test for all the parties. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, let's hear now from leaders of the major parties. Here's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
In terms of the results, it's still early. We've just had a quarter of the results in. But what I am going to carry on doing is delivering on the people's priorities. Halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the votes. That's what people want us to do. That's what I'm going to keep hard at doing.
Now, the ex-Conservative leader of Medway Council blamed the unpopularity of your government, cost of living plans, the planning changes, NHS failings. That's all down to you. A clear message from voters. What's going to change?
Look, as I said, we've only had a quarter of the results in. Actually, we're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell. But the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the votes. That's what people care about. That's what they want us to deliver. And that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
One of the big early trends is that working class voters look like they're going back to the Labour Party. Do you take personal responsibility for the overall vote? And did Boris Johnson have something that you don't?
Well, if you look at the results, we've only had a quarter of the results in, so it's hard to draw firm conclusions. We're actually making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, like Sandwell, like Bassetlaw, for example. And you mentioned the Labour Party. Look, I'm not detecting any massive groundswell of movement towards the Labour Party or excitement for their agenda. What people want us to do is focus on their priorities: halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. Those are the country's priorities. Those are this government's priorities, and that's what we're going to deliver.
That's Rishi Sunak there. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking in Medway in Kent, where his party has taken control.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough. And these are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election. A very, very good set of results for us.
Kent has been a Tory heartland for a while now. Is this a key battleground around the county now for you?
We've changed the Labour Party and we've earned the trust and confidence of voters here in Kent, and we'll do that across the country. We've shown change is possible, a better Britain is possible. A very, very good set of results for us.
Well, Liberal Democrat leader Sir Davey has been speaking in Windsor, where his party has won control from the Conservatives.
We've beaten the Conservatives in Bath and in Brentwood, in Hertfordshire and in Hinckley. We're making gains off Labour. We've increased our majority in Hull. And we're making huge gains across the country against the Conservatives. We're continuing to make sure the blue wall tumbles down. And I'm so proud of the result here in Windsor. And I'm so proud that when Katy Perry and Lionel Richie enter Windsor Castle for the coronation concert on Sunday, they'll be going into a ward that's represented by 3 brand new Liberal Democrat councillors.
Well, that's Ed Davey there. Joining me now is Daisy Cooper, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats. Daisy, a Lionel Richie and Katy Perry fan, clearly there.
Very clearly. As you can see, I mean, Ed Davey's obviously delighted to be in Windsor this morning. The set of results we've seen so far are really groundbreaking for us as a party. But I think possibly the worst is yet to come for the Conservatives, because us Liberal Democrats, we are on their heels in Hertfordshire and in Surrey, and those results are yet to be seen later today.
What is it that you think that voters are telling you?
Well, the top issues really are the NHS crisis, the fact that people can't see a GP when they want one. If they call an ambulance, they can't be certain it's going to turn up. But also the cost of living, of food and energy bills, and of course the fact that the Conservatives continue to pour raw sewage into our waterways with impunity. But on top of everything else, on top of all of that, people kind of say it's everything. You know, it's mortgages, it's crime, it's absolutely everything. And I think what we're hearing from voters is that they want wholesale change. And that's why we Liberal Democrats are calling for there to be a general election as soon as possible.
How confident are you that what you've seen today will then be translated into victories in a general election? Because the two are very different, aren't they?
Of course, local elections and general elections often are very different, and they're often fought on different issues. But what we've seen time and time again over past decades is that people start to vote Liberal Democrat at the local level, and they're so pleased with what they see. They like the way that we run our councils and look after their money and their services, that they then have the confidence to also then vote for us at the national level as well. And I'm talking to you here from St Albans, where we did precisely that. We won the control of the council in the middle of 2019, and just a few months later I was elected as the MP, where we won the constituency seat. So I think the results today, obviously they're still coming in, but the results we're seeing so far shows that we are on course to oust more Conservative MPs at the next general election.
Yes, talk me through what you're expecting. Is there anywhere else that you've pinpointed for success? Any surprises that we should look out for?
Well, I think we've already had a major surprise in Windsor and Maidenhead, but I think we could be in for some more surprises, particularly in Surrey, potentially in Sussex, and of course in Hertfordshire, which is my own area as well. So I'll be keeping a very close eye on those areas, and we'll see what the results show us later today.
Let's talk about voter ID, because I know some members of your party were a bit worried about what it means for people coming out to vote who don't have the necessary ID. Have you seen or been told about any major issues of voter ID?
So certainly there's been a number of issues, even in St Albans yesterday. I know of one person who turned up with their French driving licence and they were told that wasn't valid. A man stopped me in the street to say how could he get ID today because he wanted to vote, and he'd been turned away from one of the polling stations. And a woman actually just a couple of days ago when I canvassed her said she wasn't even going to bother to try and vote because she refused on principle to show her voter ID. And I do wonder whether really what we're going to see is that the number of people who have been disenfranchised by these new regulations and these new laws will be far greater than the number of people that were ever even suspected, let alone convicted, of voter fraud. And I do think the Conservatives will have to reflect on that very, very quickly. And I would suggest repeal that legislation at the earliest opportunity.
Daisy, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's now talk a little bit more about the broader issues and what we found out so far. Ione Wells is our political correspondent and joins me now. Ione, we were talking there to Daisy about the fact that, there is more to come. What's the time frame now? What are we waiting for? How many more councils are left and what time are we going to get those results in?
Well, as you say, there is still a lot more to come. About 3/4 of councils still yet to declare. We had that flurry this morning of results that came in overnight, but most of the councils are counting today. And I think this is where we're going to start to get a bigger picture of what exactly the picture is across the whole of the country. I think one thing that all parties will be looking out for is what happens to some of their key target areas. So the Midlands, for example, a key battleground area. I think, for example, we'll be looking at seats like Stratford-on-Avon, which is somewhere that the Liberal Democrats are hoping to gain from the Tories. Similarly, Labour have their eye on North Warwickshire. I think a particular area that Labour will be keen to make gains as well is in the north of England, areas like Blackpool, Darlington, Middlesbrough, areas where they did very badly in the 2019 general election in the so-called former Red Wall, where the Tories made a lot of gains. If Labour look like they're kind of clawing back support there, that will be something that will be heartening to the Labour Party. Equally, I think the Liberal Democrats will be hoping to make gains in some of their key target areas in the south of England, so places like Guildford and Wokingham and West Berkshire as well. Certainly, I think one message that has come out of the Liberal Democrats today has been that they weren't necessarily expecting to win places like Windsor and Maidenhead. That wasn't even one of their top targets, so I think they're certainly hoping to make further gains later this afternoon. I think in terms of the Green Party, one of the key targets for them is Mid-Suffolk. They're kind of eyeing up whether that could be their first place to get kind of control of the council area. So that would be something to watch out for as well. I think generally as well, there is this question for the Conservatives about how bad the picture will be. They are saying that this is early days and that Labour aren't making the big strides that the party would have wanted. But I think as we start to see more and more councils declaring, some of the key questions that remain are the Conservatives on track to lose more than 1,000 seats? That was the figure that they were citing as what would be a sort of really bad result for them. I think secondly, there is this question of could this be a year when Labour overtake the Conservatives in terms of the number of councillors? Those are questions which I think both main parties will be asking later this afternoon.
Okay, Ione, thank you very much indeed for that update. And let's cross now live to the newsroom to join our political correspondent David Wallace-Lockhart, who has been keeping an eye on the broader picture across England. And what's the latest?
Well, let's have a look at where the parties are currently standing in terms of changes in number of councillors. Remember, we're comparing to the 2019 local elections here. Labour up by over 120, the Conservatives down by over 230. And remember, the party had been warning it could lose 1,000 seats in this set of local elections. So we'll wait to see when the majority of councils are coming in throughout the course of today how that number looks. The Lib Dems up by 62. Very happy with their performance so far by the sounds of things. Let's look at what this means for councils changing hand. Not too much churn here, but we wouldn't expect that at this point. Labour have taken 3 councils, the Conservatives lost 10, the Lib Dems put on 1. And let's look at some of those councils in detail, starting on the Kent coast. We'll go to Medway. This had been Conservative since 2003, this council. Labour hadn't been in control since 1998, but Sir Keir Starmer has gone there to celebrate because it now is a Labour council. It's gone from Conservative to Labour, Labour getting 33 councillors, the Conservatives getting 22. And worth drawing some attention to the EU referendum result in that area, 64% for Leave. We know Labour has struggled in recent years in Leave supporting areas, so the party will be heartened to see them take Medway Council with that big a Leave vote once upon a time. We can look at how the seats on the council have changed there. Down 13 for the Conservatives compared to the 2019 local elections. Labour up by 11. If we go to Berkshire now, we can look at Windsor and Maidenhead, which is, of course, the big Lib Dem celebration we're seeing so far. The party leader, Sir Davey, has been there to declare its time up for Rishi Sunak. It had been a Conservative council since 2007. One of the local MPs, of course, is Theresa May. But it does look like the Lib Dems are putting in a very strong showing there. 22 seats, 8 for the Independents, 7 for the Conservatives. How's that changed since 2019? The Lib Dems up by 13, the Conservatives down by 16. So obviously, when we look at that particular council and we look at Medway, the Conservatives facing challenges from both Labour and the Lib Dems in different types of seats, and I'm sure at the back of their minds will be the idea of what that could mean in a general election scenario. Some of the key councils we want to be looking out throughout today: Stratford-on-Avon in Warwickshire, that was Conservative. Lib Dems putting in quite a strong showing there. We'd imagine that's one of the areas where they hope to do well, so we'll keep an eye on what happens there. Dover, of course, in Kent was Conservative, but Labour hoping to put in a strong showing there. Areas like Blackpool in the northwest as well, where Labour didn't do too well in the 2019 local elections, and they'll be looking to claw back some of that support. We don't have time to go through everything so far, but of course, if you go to the BBC website or the BBC app, you can put in your postcode and find out what's happening locally. If you're having local elections, have the results come in yet, or are they happening throughout the day? You'll be able to get the latest there. But as we say, most councils still to come, lots of results still to come in, and as they come in, we'll get a clearer picture of what this means for all the parties.
David, thank you very much indeed for that. David Wallace-Lockhart there with all the very latest broader picture. Well, joining me now is Shadow Economic Secretary to the Treasury and Labour spokesperson Tulip Saddiq, and the Conservative MP and Minister in the Department of Business and Trade, Kevin Hollinrake. Thank you both of you for joining me. And first of all, Tulip, to you, your reaction to what we've seen so far. We're not all the way there yet, but pretty good night for Labour so far.
Absolutely. As you say, we haven't seen all the results, but looking at Stoke-on-Trent, Medway, even the Middlesbrough mayor, which we really weren't expecting, Chris Cook, to be elected. People on the ground messaging saying this was not one we expected to win. So a great night, very good for our local councillors who've been working so hard, a positive campaign, and winning places like Worthing, which we actually didn't even win in 97. So we feel optimistic, confident, on course for a Labour victory at the next general election.
Kevin?
I don't quite see how Tulip does, and this time I should say that. It's not great for us, there's no doubt about it. And we're 15 points behind in the poll, so there's no surprises here, but it could have been an awful lot worse. I mean, it's obviously it's not great to see the loss of very good Conservative councillors up and down the country, but I think that what we're seeing, you look at the national picture in terms of year on year, the vote share, Labour's vote hasn't gone up, not significantly. That's according to John Curtis. So we think it's all to play for. We've made huge progress. That 15-point lead was 30 points only a few months ago, so we're making progress. We need to continue that progress, tackle the priorities, which are getting the economy growing again, tackling inflation, sorting the NHS out, and stopping the boats. We do that, I think we're in good shape for the next general election.
And he does have a point there, doesn't he? John Curtis did say that vote share hasn't changed in 12 months. So what do these elections really tell us, Tulip?
I think, first of all, I'd say to Kevin, they've had 13 years to sort out everything that he's mentioned, the NHS, economy, jobs. What have they been doing for 13 years? There's no point coming now after a terrible night of results for the Conservatives talking about how, these are the things we're going to be focusing on. They've had 13 years to do it. Why haven't they done it then? Also, if you look at the last time these election results happened in 2019, it was a different set of circumstances. So we hadn't left the EU at that point. Theresa May resigned quite soon after the elections happened, and the Conservatives lost 1,300 seats. anything that's an improvement from there is a very low bar in my opinion. So I'm not really sure I believe this. I think listening to this, it's denial really about the failures and the fact that people are punishing the Conservatives for crashing the economy last year. It's not something they've forgotten. I know the Conservative MPs try to pretend that didn't happen. It did happen. Liz Truss, who we haven't forgotten, did crash the economy, and now there's some payback for it.
Kevin, I see you shaking your head, but people may be watching this at home and thinking, well, you know, the Tory party have been in power for 13 years, and all these problems that you're talking about solving are problems that have happened to them for the most part over the last 13 years. Do you think maybe there's a feeling that people are, you know, thinking, well, you know, who can we trust to take this forward?
Well, it's tough for people out there, there's no doubt about it. Cost of living pressures are very significant, but those pressures have come because of international events we had no control over. COVID, obviously, for starters, and then Putin's invasion of Ukraine and how that drove up energy prices. So these are things we are dealing with. We are making progress on those things. People are seeing energy bills now come down and have been protected over the last 12 months. So I think most people see most of the economic challenges we have now are economic. I think most people would see the Conservative Party is much better at managing the economy than the opposition, particularly when the only answer I think Tulip's party has is to throw lots and lots of other people's money at it. And the question I get time and time again from my constituents on Labour's plans is, where's the money coming from?
So for the first start, of course there were external factors at play here, but we were uniquely left exposed because our economy wasn't growing. So there's no point just blaming global factors. Because of our internal situation and the fact that we haven't grown at all, we were uniquely exposed. But could I just say...
You're talking about Brexit, Tulip?
I'm talking about the fact that we haven't tackled the cost of living crisis in any way. And Kevin is completely wrong to say we're throwing other people's money. The money that we want to use is oil and gas giants. On a record, they've had huge profits made. We've said over and over again we would use an extended windfall tax to freeze council tax, this time in the local elections. I'm not sure why the Conservatives aren't listening to us. We talked about a windfall tax, but now we want an extended windfall tax, which was raised £10.4 billion. We've been talking about that. That would help ordinary people. It's not just other people's money. It's money from people who've said they have too much money, they don't know what to do about it. That's the money we would be using. And I'm not sure why the Conservatives are prioritising them over hard-working people.
Kevin?
Well, the figures just don't add up. I mean, Tulip's party's spending plans amount to about £100 billion. If you reverse the rising corporation tax, if you let tax thresholds increase with inflation, all stuff that Labour's promised to do, abolishing business rates, there's £100 billion there. Even if you raise taxes on oil and gas companies.
Okay, then what's your solution?
Taxes on oil and gas companies
what's your
are
solution?
now 75% of profits.
But you're
so
in
you're
government.
What's
your solution?
Those companies just won't invest in the infrastructure we need in terms of green energy, in terms of gas exploration. Our solution, Tulip, is to balance the books, get the economy growing again.
We've had 13 years.
The economy has grown in the G7 with the third fastest growth since 2010. Only US and Canada faster than us. We haven't had a poor record on growth. We want a better record. That's our plan. Most people I speak to think we've got a better plan for that than Labour have.
Out of the OECD and 38 countries, we're 28th when it comes to how much we've grown in the economy. We're the only country in the G7. Sorry, you've had your chance. I'm just going to
let Tulip have a go.
In the G7, we're the only country that hasn't grown before its post-pandemic economy. So we're not doing very well. That's for a start. But also, there's all this talk about, we need to balance the books. We need to do that. They've had 13 years and they haven't done any of it. Our extended windfall tax is very different to what Kevin is saying. It's possible he doesn't know the details of it. We're talking about backdating it so that we get more money. We're talking about taxing the rates at the same level as other countries. And we're talking about closing a very specific loophole, which is about getting more money. Is an investment loophole that we would want to close. So we're talking about making it more sophisticated, having a proper windfall tax. It's not something the Conservatives disagree with in terms of a windfall tax, because they have brought it in. But our idea is to have a more extended one, and it would actually help people right now. So I'm not sure why they wouldn't do it. I'm
going to let you answer that, and it's our last answer, I'm afraid.
Well, imagine the impact on investment, business investment. If you said to businesses, we're going to backdate taxation, retrospective taxation, it is devastating for business. It is a complete nonsense. And it's also wrong to say, to talk about the growth in our economy. It hasn't recovered to pre-pandemic levels. If you look at the private sector, the private sector has grown, is above where it was.
No, you can manipulate the figures all you want. They have not. It has not grown.
Sector has. You look at the figures.
Do you think, Kevin, that people feel the economic growth in their pockets every day?
Of course, these are difficult times. That's why we're throwing hundreds of billions of pounds at the problem to see people through this. But most people recognise that government can't solve all problems. We have to balance the books. We run a £140 billion deficit this year. Tulip Party wants to spend another £90 billion on top of it. It's completely
if they're doing so well, if the Conservatives are doing so well, why have they had a disastrous set of elections last night?
Okay, Tulip, Saddiq, Kevin, Hollinrake, I'm so sorry, we've run out of time. It's been so good to get you on the programme, both of you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think now it's time to get a flavour of what's been going on from Richard Moss, our political editor for BBC North East and Cumbria. Richard, give us a lowdown of what's happening in Darlington.
Well, they're at the moment still counting votes. We've had no results declared so far. This is a big Labour target. They lost control of this council in 2019, as they did, in fact, of all the 5 councils in what's called the Tees Valley area. They lost 9 seats in 2019. They need to win 6 back to gain control today. Now, Labour believes this is on a knife edge, really, because the Conservatives have put a lot of effort in here. This is the one council in the area where they have a say in it, effectively. They run it as a minority at the moment. It's no overall control, but they are the largest party. Now, Labour want to at least banish that, but they'll want to get back control here. And they've got some encouragement overnight. They won the Middlesbrough mayoral election, getting that from an independent, and also made some progress in Hartlepool, came within 3 votes of taking back control of that council, which is another one they lost 4 years ago. Crucial area, this one, for Labour, because there are a host of seats that went Conservative in 2019 when Boris Johnson called his general election, which followed that horrible set of local election results about 6 or 7 months earlier. So Darlington's still some way off getting some results. Turnout between about 30 and 40% in some of the wards, but a key contest between Labour and Conservatives in an area. There's a Conservative MP here who'll be studying the results very closely to see what it means for him.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much indeed for that. And we have a little bit of time before we take a short break. So I want to update you on what we know so far. Results are still coming in. There was a whole slew of results earlier on this morning, but some council didn't count votes overnight. So we're waiting for about 3/4, I think, of councils to declare over the next few hours. But what we do know so far is that the Conservative Party has suffered some losses, both to the Labour Party but also to the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats saying that their results have been groundbreaking after taking surprise wins, particularly at Windsor. The Labour Party also very excited about what's been happening for them, particularly in terms of some of the councils taken by Labour, including Medway in Kent, Stoke-on-Trent, Plymouth, and also there is now a new Labour mayor in Middlesbrough as well. But as I said, the results are still coming in, and it's very difficult to gauge how things have gone, mainly, of course, because local elections are so difficult to look into. It's difficult to extrapolate from local elections how general elections can possibly go. But we have had a few Labour MPs and Conservative MPs both saying that there's still plenty of time between now and a potential general election. So if you want more on what you've been watching here on BBC News, please go onto our website. You'll find there a live page with all the very latest on it. I'm on it right now. Lots of input from our correspondents on the ground across the country. We're telling you exactly which councils have declared, and also if you want to know who's won in your area, counting is still underway in many areas. 62 of the 230 councils have declared, but if you can use our handy postcode checker, you can see who has taken the seats where you live. You can find it there on our website. But for now, do stay with us here on BBC News. Plenty more coverage of these local elections here on the BBC.